Hi there, I'm Adeline. Have you ever been betrayed by the very people who were supposed to protect you? I thought my family would always have my back, until one rainy night when my own mom and sister turned on me, and everything I had built was ripped away. Why would a family destroy one of their own over a lie? Before we dive in, tell me, have you ever felt like a stranger in your own home? Drop a comment below and let's talk about it. The late afternoon sun filtered through the lace curtains, casting patterns across the living room floor of the old Tate house. The air smelled faintly of furniture polish and the lemon candles my mother insisted on lighting for family occasions. I smoothed my sweater down nervously, the fabric snagging against my damp palms. A family meeting, they said. Nothing formal, just a gathering. Casual, they promised. But the pit in my stomach told a different story. I sat on the edge of the couch, feeling the springs protest under my weight as Lorraine bustled about, adjusting throw pillows that didn't need adjusting. Robert stood by the fireplace, hands tucked into the pockets of his work jeans, staring into the empty grate like it held answers. Bryson scrolled absently on his phone. Morgan whispered something under her breath that made Bryson chuckle. I smiled, thin and wobbly, desperate to believe that today was the day things would change. Maybe they had finally seen me. Maybe they were proud. The words barely had time to form before the world split open. Lorraine's voice cracked like a whip through the room, accusations pouring out in a torrent. She lunged before I could move, her palm connecting with my cheek in a flash of white heat. Morgan was right behind her, shoving me backward, shouting things I couldn't even process. Tiffany's name floated through the chaos like an ugly omen. Betrayal. That was the word that took root in my chest, cold and immovable. I didn't fight back. I didn't scream. I didn't run. I stood there, absorbing blow after blow, not physical ones after the first slap, but verbal ones sharp enough to flay me alive. Bryson never looked up from his phone. Robert never moved from the fireplace. I wanted to believe they were stunned into silence. But deep down, I knew. They agreed. They had made their decision long before today. Maybe if I had seen it coming, I could have run. But I hadn't. And now, here I was, frozen in a room full of strangers who happened to share my blood. My face burned where Lorraine's hand had landed, but it was nothing compared to the hollow ache unfurling in my chest. It felt like something vital had been scooped out of me, leaving nothing but a shell behind. I don't remember walking out of the living room. I only remember the scent that hit me when I staggered into the kitchen, the smell of roast chicken, rosemary, and something too sweet. A smell that yanked me back weeks before, to another gathering, another night that had seemed filled with hope. It was supposed to be a celebration. I had worked for 2 years straight without a break, clawed my way up from assistant to junior accountant, and finally earned a promotion. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. I had saved every spare dollar, bought decorations, baked a cake from scratch. I wanted one night where my family looked at me and saw more than a convenient afterthought. I placed the roasted chicken in the center of the table, heart hammering with anticipation. Lorraine complimented the aroma. Robert even smiled, briefly. I thought, maybe this time. Bryson crashed through the front door 15 minutes late, waving a set of grimy keys in the air. "Guess who just bought his first truck?" he shouted. And just like that, I ceased to exist. The conversation pivoted. Cheers erupted. Lorraine rushed over to examine the keys. Robert clapped Bryson on the back. Morgan popped open a bottle of cheap champagne someone had brought, just in case. I sat at the table, invisible, a ghost in my own home, while my announcement, carefully rehearsed, tucked neatly inside my chest, withered on my tongue. I smiled until my cheeks ached. I laughed at Bryson's jokes. I helped clear the plates. I sang along when Morgan started a raucous birthday song for Bryson, even though it wasn't anywhere near his birthday. No one noticed the untouched cake on the counter. No one asked why the banner over the table read, "Congratulations." As I scrubbed dishes alone later that night, the question burned in my mind, raw and relentless. If they didn't see me when I shined, why would they care when I broke? I wiped my hands on a dish towel and pulled out the trash, my fingers brushing against something stiff tucked at the back of the drawer. Curious, I tugged it free. A photo. Our last family portrait, except someone had carefully, meticulously cut me out. Even before the accusations, they had already erased me. The rain hadn't let up by the time I made it to my tiny rental room. Drops of water trailed down my jacket, pooling onto the floor as I stood there, frozen, not quite sure how to even begin processing what had just happened. I peeled off my soaked clothes mechanically, leaving a trail behind me, and sat at the edge of the bed. The room was cold despite the broken radiator sputtering in the corner. The walls, once painted a cheerful yellow, now looked sallow and tired under the weak light bulb hanging overhead. I wrapped the blanket around my shoulders, staring blankly at the cracked window. The world outside blurred, water streaking the glass in jagged lines like veins, as if even the sky couldn't hold itself together. It should have been my night, my celebration. That memory pierced through the fog like a shard of glass. I could still see the living room, the table set carefully, the cake I had baked, chocolate with whipped cream frosting, melting slowly at the edges as the evening wore on. I remembered how Lorraine, with a beaming smile, had pulled out a wrapped gift, a brand new watch, for Bryson. His birthday was still months away, but there it was, a token of their pride. Everyone had cheered. Everyone had celebrated. Except me. My own announcement about the promotion, rehearsed and trembling on my tongue, was swallowed whole by Bryson's laughter and Morgan's clinking champagne glass. I had smiled anyway, lifting my own cup in a mock toast, my heart crumbling quietly inside. I was always their backup plan, never the reason to celebrate. The image of the cake melting on the counter surfaced again, the decorations drooping as time slipped by unnoticed. Just like me. I wiped my hands over my face, trying to scrub away the stickiness of that memory, but it clung stubbornly, stitched into the fabric of who I had become. Days passed. I moved through them like a shadow, showing up to work, cashing meager paychecks, watching the seasons change outside my window without ever really feeling them. The silence from my family was deafening, a void that grew wider with each passing hour. One night, after tossing and turning for hours, I picked up my phone. My thumb hovered over my mother's contact. I told myself it wasn't desperation. It was hope. The call rang once, twice, then her voice, sharp, impatient. "If you're just calling to brag, save it." Before I could even find words, the line went dead. The screen flashed, call ended, in bold, indifferent letters. I sat there, the glow of the phone burning into my palm, colder than the night air. There was a kind of finality to it, sharper than any slap, a dismissal so casual it didn't even warrant a full sentence. I set the phone down carefully, as if afraid it might shatter. Maybe it already had. The walls of my room seemed to press in closer, the air thinning. Silence wasn't just around me, it was inside me, humming through my bones. When I checked my voicemail later out of habit, it was full. Not with messages, not with concern, just echoes, empty space, a cemetery of calls that would never come. My throat tightened, but I didn't cry. There was no point. Grief without acknowledgement feels more like suffocation than sadness. Eventually, needing something, anything, to distract myself, I opened my laptop. Maybe I could find an old photo album, a video, a thread tying me back to the world I thought I knew. Social media was a mistake. There they were, my family, smiling at a dinner I hadn't been invited to, laughing over plates piled with food, glasses raised in easy cheer. The caption beneath the photo, "Family is everything." And somewhere, between Lorraine's forced smile and Morgan's too wide grin, there was a gap where I should have been. Even online, there was no place left for me. The rain hadn't stopped since the night I left. It hammered against the roof of my rental like a relentless reminder of everything that had collapsed. I sat at the kitchen table, hunched over my chipped mug of instant coffee, the silence around me thick and heavy. I opened my phone almost without thinking. Maybe there was a message, a call, a crack in the ice that had grown between us. Hope, no matter how bruised, was a stubborn thing. Instead, it hit me like a second slap. Lorraine had posted pictures from another family gathering, one I hadn't even known about. Bright smiles, hands clasped in toast, plates heaped high with food, My siblings stood shoulder to shoulder, Morgan's grin wide and artificial, Bryson holding up a bottle of wine like a trophy. And me? Not even a ghost in the background. Every picture framed the world perfectly around the void where I should have been. Cropped, absent, forgotten. Maybe I had only ever been a placeholder in their portraits. The thought settled over me like a second skin, suffocating and strangely familiar. Without fully thinking it through, I tapped under one of the photos, my fingers clumsy and desperate. I typed, "Wish I was there." An error popped up. "You cannot comment on this post." Blocked. The rejection wasn't even private anymore. It was curated, polished, made public for the world to see. Like erasing me from the dinner table wasn't enough. They needed to erase me from the narrative, too. I locked my phone, pressing it so hard against the table that the screen lit up from the pressure. Then I let it fall face down and closed my eyes. The next morning I forced myself outside. The rain had slowed to a misty drizzle, but the cold bit deep as I made my way to the farmer's market. The same one I'd gone to since I was a little girl, tugging at Lorraine's hand and begging for caramel apples. The market smelled of wet produce and old wood. Vendors chatted in low murmurs behind their stalls. A few heads turned when I walked past. Conversations cut off mid-sentence. I adjusted the hood of my jacket, trying to shrink into myself, to become less seen. It didn't work. "Not so perfect after all," a voice hissed. I didn't turn, but I didn't have to. I recognized the woman, Mrs. Callahan, who had lived 2 doors down from us my whole life, who had once bandaged my scraped knee when I fell off my bike. My hands shook as I picked up a bag of apples, fumbling them into the crook of my elbow. Another whisper, another glance that lingered too long. The apples slipped from my arms, scattering across the wet concrete. They bounced and rolled, bruising and splitting open. No one moved to help. No one even flinched. I knelt down, gathering what I could, my jeans soaking through at the knees. One apple was too far gone to save. I left it there, bleeding its sticky sweetness onto the pavement like a wound. When I stood up, the world felt different, smaller, sharper. The betrayal wasn't private anymore. It had seeped into the streets, into the sidewalks, into the breath of the town itself. When your world shrinks, even silence sounds like a verdict. The garage smelled of damp concrete and motor oil, thick and suffocating under the heavy weight of the storm outside. Rain pounded the metal roof in chaotic rhythms, drowning out the sound of my own shallow breathing. They had summoned me here, like a criminal called to judgment. But no one would tell me why. I stood near the door, hesitant, while the others arranged themselves in a tight semicircle. Lorraine on a folding chair, Robert leaning stiffly against the workbench, Bryson slouched with that familiar smirk carved into his face, and Morgan pacing like a prosecuting attorney preparing her case. And Serena. She stood apart, near the shadows where the single overhead bulb didn't quite reach, her arms folded, head down, eyes refusing to meet mine. The betrayal stung sharper than the icy drafts that crept in through the cracked garage door. Even she won't stand up for me. I swallowed hard, feeling the tremor that worked its way up my spine. Whatever flicker of hope I had left, whatever belief that someone, anyone, might defend me, guttered out in that moment. Lorraine was the first to speak, her voice slicing through the tension like a knife. "You have disgraced us," she said, as if reading a verdict already decided. Morgan dumped a pile of printed papers onto the greasy workbench. I recognized them immediately, fabricated screenshots, doctored conversations, all courtesy of Tiffany's poison. They had believed it. Every word. "You betrayed this family," Morgan added, her voice shrill with a fury that felt rehearsed. Bryson chimed in lazily, not even looking up from his phone. Maybe she was always like this. Robert said nothing. He didn't have to. His silence was an endorsement loud enough to fill the room. I opened my mouth, tried to speak, to explain, but Lorraine's palm slapped the air between us, a gesture sharp enough to stop me mid-sentence. "We are not interested in excuses," she snapped. Each accusation landed harder than the last, each word stripping away another layer of my already battered heart. The atmosphere thickened until it felt like I was breathing through wet cloth. Each inhale an effort, each exhale a silent scream. They had decided. They had chosen their story. And in it, I was the villain. When I looked to Serena, desperate for any sign of protest, she only turned her face away. That, more than the words, more than the papers, broke something in me that would never fully mend. Lorraine stood up, lifting a cracked picture frame from the workbench. The old family photo we had taken at the lake when I was 13. She slammed it down hard onto the table. The glass shattered with a sharp crack that echoed through the garage. A verdict sealed. I stumbled back a step, the shards glinting like tiny knives under the flickering light. No defense allowed, no mercy offered. In that instant, I understood. They weren't just casting me out. They were rewriting the story where I never existed. The air inside the garage was colder now, the storm pressing against the thin metal walls as if trying to claw its way inside. Lorraine's voice echoed harshly in my ears, but it was Morgan who moved first, her boots slamming against the concrete floor as she advanced. She flung a handful of crumpled papers at my feet, Tiffany's forged texts, their ink already starting to smudge from the dampness clinging to the room. Proof, they called it. Proof of betrayal, proof of shame. I didn't bend to pick them up. Lorraine crossed her arms and nodded once, like a judge rendering a sentence. Robert, silent as always, simply looked past me as if I were already gone. Bryson didn't even bother hiding his grin, the corner of his mouth twitching with amusement. I didn't plead. I didn't beg. There were no words left that could bridge the chasm they had dug between us. They wanted a villain. I gave up trying to be their daughter. Lorraine's voice cracked through the stale air again, sharper than the thunder rolling outside. Get out! The words hit harder than any slap. Final. Absolute. I opened my mouth, not to argue but to ask for my things, my coat at least. But Morgan was already moving toward me, shoving me with enough force that I stumbled back toward the door. Robert didn't lift a hand to stop her. Bryson laughed under his breath. The rain outside wasn't just rain, it was a wall. It swallowed me whole as I stumbled into it, the door slamming behind me with a final deafening thud. Within seconds, I was soaked to the bone. The driveway was a slick river of mud and debris, and my shoes sank with every staggering step. My torn duffel bag, packed in blind desperation the night before, slipped from my shoulder and thudded into a puddle. I tightened my grip and kept walking. The wind howled, ripping at my clothes, slapping my hair against my face in wet strands. Every step away from the house felt like stepping into another life, one where my name was just a whisper in rooms I no longer belonged to. Streetlights flickered uncertainly in the distance. The world was blurred, smeared by rain and grief, but I could still feel the burning stares of judgment etched into my back. I had nothing now, except myself. And maybe that was something. I crossed into the next block, my body shivering violently, my lungs aching with the effort of breathing against the storm. Every possession I had left was soaked and heavy, dragging at my shoulders like accusations. But I didn't stop. I couldn't. Ahead, the street stretched empty and endless, offering no shelter, no safety, but something else, something I hadn't felt in a long time. A grim, stubborn freedom. I hadn't just lost my family that night. They had thrown my soul into the storm. The morning crept in slow and heavy, dragging a damp grayness through the streets of Asheville. I huddled under the awning of a shuttered laundromat, my clothes stiff from the night's cold, my skin still wet with rain, or maybe just the kind of sadness that clings and soaks through. I pulled my duffel bag tighter against me, its contents sagging from the weight of the storm. My fingers ached from the cold, but I couldn't force myself to move yet. I needed just a little more time to piece together what had been shattered inside me. Footsteps splashed through the puddles, slow and deliberate. I didn't look up at first, but then a small box hit the sidewalk near my feet, skidding and spinning until it stopped against my shoe. I blinked at it, the world narrowing to that single sodden square of cardboard. Lorraine's voice cut through the mist. Here, might as well take this too. No apology, no hesitation. She turned and walked away before I could even react, her figure swallowed by the drizzle, leaving behind only the sharp sting of rejection. I bent down slowly, my knees cracking from the cold, and pried the box open. Inside, the family ring, once passed from grandmother to mother to daughter, lay nestled in a damp scrap of velvet. Only now, it was cracked straight through the band, the metal tarnished black, the once proud gem dull and lifeless. I sank down onto the wet concrete, the box cradled in my palms like a funeral offering. Silent sobs racked my chest, not loud enough to fill the empty street, but enough to split me open from the inside out. They hadn't just rejected me. They erased the idea that I ever belonged. I pressed the broken ring into my jacket pocket and forced myself to my feet, one foot in front of the other. Survival wasn't pretty. It wasn't noble. It was just moving when every part of you wanted to stay collapsed. I found a listing in the window of a grimy corner store, room for rent. Cheap, no questions asked. The room smelled like mold and regret. The wallpaper peeled in sad curls from the walls. The mattress sagged like it had given up years ago. But it was a roof, and for now, that was enough. I started job hunting the next morning, moving from storefront to storefront, leaving resumes with trembling hands. Most were met with polite refusals, some with barely hidden pity. Damaged goods, no references, no family ties, no safety net. I took whatever work I could find. Dishwashing, stocking shelves in a dusty thrift store, scrubbing toilets in a motel that rented by the hour. Dinner became stale crackers and whatever expired soup I could grab from the back of the discount bin. Laundry day was a luxury measured in quarters carefully counted out from a mason jar I labeled Freedom. Freedom smelled like bleach and old coffee and slept under a blanket too thin to fight the winter drafts. But it was mine. At night, the vacancy sign outside my window buzzed and flickered, its broken neon humming a lullaby I clung to out of necessity. Freedom, after all, didn't mean comfort. It meant no one could throw you out again. I patched together a fragile routine, small victories tucked between exhaustion and hunger. A smile from a diner patron, a dog that wagged its tail when I passed by, an unexpected tip left folded under a chipped coffee mug. I started to believe that maybe, just maybe, the worst had passed. But rock bottom has a way of revealing new floors beneath your feet. The new place smelled of old paper and floor wax. A secondhand bookstore turned halfway into an apartment by someone with more optimism than skill. But it was dry, and the walls didn't leak when it rained, which already made it an upgrade. I had worked a full week at the diner, saving every wrinkled tip, counting coins under the weak bulb hanging from the ceiling. It wasn't much, but it was mine. It had to be. Hope, when it came, arrived thin and worn around the edges. When I told my landlord I was moving out of the motel, he had smiled thinly and nodded. The next morning, he claimed the room was damaged beyond repair, keeping my entire deposit without hesitation. I wanted to scream. I wanted to shove the peeling walls down with my bare hands. Instead, I stood there in the parking lot, my duffel bag slumping against my calf, and let the anger bleed out of me silently. Even the ones you pay still find ways to steal from you. It would have been easy to sink then, to let that small scrap of hope burn out completely, but something stubborn curled inside me, something the rain hadn't managed to wash away. I took my last paycheck, folded with trembling fingers, and handed it over to a woman behind the bookstore counter who barely looked up from her crossword puzzle. Cash only, no promises, no pity. It was enough. The room upstairs barely fit a mattress, a battered dresser, and a single window that screeched every time I tried to open it. The floorboards creaked with every step like old bones. I hung my damp jacket over the chair, curled onto the thin mattress, and told myself I wasn't starting over. I was starting something new. A week later, as rain slithered down the bookstore windows and a clock ticked somewhere in the distance, the door chimed. I didn't look up right away. Customers trickled in often, looking, not buying. But then, a small paper cup slid across the table to me. Black coffee, steam rising in soft tendrils. A hand, familiar and trembling slightly, pulling back before I could speak. Serena. She didn't say anything, didn't offer apologies or explanations. She just sat down at the next table, flipping through a worn paperback, pretending not to notice the stunned way I stared at her. The tension in my chest didn't disappear, but it shifted, loosened, just enough. Maybe forgiveness didn't come in grand gestures. Maybe it came in coffee cups and quiet company. Over the next few days, Serena returned. Sometimes she brought muffins from the diner. Sometimes she just sat nearby, reading or doodling in a notebook. She never pried, never asked me to unpack the wreckage. She just stayed. Slowly, wordlessly, something fragile took root between us. Trust, maybe, or something that hoped to be trust, if given enough time and patience. One rainy afternoon, as she gathered her things to leave, Serena accidentally left behind her umbrella, half broken, the ribs sticking out awkwardly. I picked it up, laughing quietly for the first time in what felt like years. It wasn't perfect, it barely worked, but it had still tried to shield her from the rain. Maybe that was enough. Sometimes the smallest sparks are the ones that burn the brightest against the dark. The bookstore smelled of damp paper and old wood, a comforting ache that clung to the air long after the rain had stopped. Clouds hung low over Asheville that afternoon, heavy and reluctant to break, casting the small room in a permanent twilight. It had been a quiet day. A few regulars drifted in and out, leaving muddy footprints and half-smiles behind them. I stayed at the counter, sorting a box of battered classics, breathing in the stillness like it was medicine. The world was smaller now, fewer voices threading through my days. But smaller didn't mean emptier. Some absences, I was learning, made more space for breathing. When the news about Serena came, it arrived not with a bang but a whisper. A mutual acquaintance, speaking in hushed tones over a borrowed paperback, mentioned it without looking me in the eye. Eleanor had cut Serena off completely. No calls, no visits, no holiday invitations, because of me. Serena breezed into the store later that day, as if nothing had changed. But I knew. I could see it in the set of her shoulders, the extra beat she took before smiling, the slight tremor she smoothed over with practiced ease. She had lost everything because she chose to see me. Gratitude and guilt twisted together in my chest, a knot too tight to unravel. I wanted to apologize, to make it lighter somehow, but she just pressed a small cracked mirror into my hand with a crooked grin. "Perfect, right?" she said, winking. I turned it over in my palms, tracing the spiderweb fractures running through the glass. It reflected my face in broken pieces, scattered and incomplete. And yet, somehow, it looked more honest than anything I had seen in years. Later that night, after Serena had gone, after the bookstore had been swallowed whole by shadows, I sat on the floor beneath the creaky window and stared into the mirror again. I didn't flinch. The woman staring back at me wasn't ruined. She wasn't fragile or pitiful or lost. She was scarred, yes, but she was also resilient. And resilient didn't mean unbroken. It meant breaking and choosing to stand anyway. I realized then that I had been waiting all this time for them to come back, for them to say they were wrong, for closure that would sew the jagged edges together. But closure wasn't something they could give. It was something I had to choose. I folded the cracked mirror into a soft cloth and tucked it into the drawer beside my bed, a reminder that broken things could still hold beauty. And maybe forgiveness wasn't about them deserving it. Maybe it was about freeing myself from the weight they no longer earned the right to carry. The next morning, I pinned a small flyer in the bookstore window, announcing community reading space coming soon. Not because I had to, because I could, because building something from the wreckage was its own kind of revenge. A week later, a letter arrived. No return address, no warning. The envelope sat on the counter like a ghost daring me to open it. Some ghosts don't haunt you. They come knocking, asking to be let back in. The rain finally stopped that night, but the air still smelled of damp concrete and old books. A heavy stillness hung over the bookstore, wrapping the small space in a hush that felt almost sacred. I sat behind the counter, the soft glow of a single lamp casting long shadows across the scuffed floorboards. The envelope lay in front of me, its edges slightly curled from moisture, my name written in a hand I knew better than I wanted to admit. Morgan. After everything, after all the silence and slander and severed ties, here she was, not in person, but in ink, asking for forgiveness. I turned the envelope over and over in my hands, the paper whispering against my fingertips. When I finally opened it, the words spilled out in a rush, messy and uneven, like she had been choking on them for years. apologies, regrets, pleas for a second chance, memories we had once shared, twisted now into bargaining chips. I read the letter once, twice, and with each line the old instincts stirred. The part of me that had always reached back, had always tried to fix what I hadn't broken. But Serena's quiet presence in the corner of the room anchored me. She was stacking books, humming under her breath, pretending not to notice the battle raging inside me. They only reached for me when their own bridges were ash. The thought came sharp and clear, slicing through the fog of guilt and nostalgia. They hadn't missed me. They missed what I could give. Forgiveness, validation, a clean slate to rewrite their history without having to face the wreckage they left behind. I folded the letter carefully, smoothing the creases with steady hands, and tucked it away in the bottom drawer of the counter. Not to throw it away, not to keep it close, but to remember. To remember who I had become without them. I didn't need to open old wounds to prove I had healed. Some doors stayed closed, not out of anger, but out of wisdom. That night, Serena and I hosted the first official meeting of our community book club. It wasn't much, just a handful of locals crammed into mismatched chairs, sipping lukewarm coffee and laughing over bent-spined novels. But it was ours. The bookstore, once a shelter, had become a beacon, a place where forgotten people could find stories that mirrored their own, where broken didn't mean worthless. I stood near the front window after everyone had gone, watching the neon vacancy sign across the street flicker and buzz, its faulty light a reminder that even broken things still served a purpose. Healing isn't a finish line, it's a garden you tend to, day after day. I wasn't whole, but I was growing. As I wiped down the counter, a woman wandered in, her coat dripping rainwater onto the welcome mat. "Do you carry any books about forgiveness?" she asked, a hopeful tilt to her voice. I smiled, the weight in my chest lifting just slightly. "Not yet," I said, reaching for a blank notebook. "But maybe I should write one myself someday." Looking back now, I realize healing is not about waiting for apologies that may never come. It's about choosing yourself, every single day, even when the world tries to convince you that you're not enough. Pain teaches us, but it does not define us. I learned that family is not just blood. Sometimes family is built from those who choose to stay when others walk away. We are allowed to grow beyond the places that tried to keep us small. We are allowed to rewrite our own stories, even if others refuse to read them. What about you? Have you ever had to walk away from people you once thought would never leave? I'd love to hear your story. Tell me in the comments, where are you watching from, and what part of this journey touched you the most? If this video resonated with you, please comment 1 inch below or let me know what city you're from. If you didn't connect with it, I'd still love to hear your thoughts and feedback. Every voice matters here. And if you'd like to hear more real, heartfelt stories like this, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us keep sharing moments that heal, inspire, and remind us all that we're not alone.